Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company. In addition to hosting MSNBC's The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, Mr. O'Donnell is also a very good writer. His first book, Deadly Force, A Police Shooting and My Family's Search for the Truth, recently reissued, is the story of a 1975 police shooting of an unarmed man, a black man, in fact, in Boston. It makes headlines then, but sadly, it's still appropriate today. Welcome. It's certainly appropriate today, isn't it? Today.
Yeah, and that's why I brought the book out again, Ronnie. I updated it with a new introduction and a new epilogue to bring it into the 21st century. Because when this subject became something that everyone got concerned about 4 years ago, when Michael Brown was shot, unarmed black man was shot and killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And the reason our attention went to that incident in Missouri was not exactly what happened that day, but what happened in the days afterward. And what happened in the days afterward was chaos in the streets and police crowd control gone wrong and rioting. And this was the very first time that we had seen chaos like that, public chaos like that, in the aftermath of a police shooting since the invention of cable news. Suddenly, there were cameras on every street corner in Ferguson 24 hours a day. Now, we had riots like that.
All on every block with your iPhone.
We had community responses and reactions like that before. We had a giant outbreak of rioting in Miami, 1980, with the killing of Arthur McDuffie by Miami police, and on others around the country. But this was the first time cable news was there, and social media was there, and suddenly white America woke up to the dimensions of this problem for the first time. Black America had already known about it and had been suffering at a disproportionate level the bad police use of deadly force. And let me just say at the outset of this discussion, what we're going to be talking about here are the bad uses of police use of deadly force. Everything we know about the subject, everything we know about the statistical picture indicates that most police use of deadly force is justified and necessary to save the lives of police officers or others being threatened by someone. And so we're talking about the problem of police use of deadly force, not the good version of police use of deadly force, which is most of it. But the problem has been with us for a very long time, and I wanted people who are new to the subject to realize where we have been on this subject, how distressingly familiar the new cases are to the old cases that I talk about in the book, and then the small ways, and they are only small ways, in which we've seen some interesting incremental improvements here and there around the country.
But you know, most police officers, I think the great majority never fire a gun.
Never in their lives. No, and that's the big confusion that Hollywood has created, is the idea that policing, first of all, is much more dangerous than it is.
And
because
always drawing
every officer's always getting shot at, and every officer has to kill someone in every TV show and in every movie at least once, usually multiple times. The truth of police work is, it is not one of our most dangerous occupations. It's not listed anywhere close to one of our most dangerous occupations. That's always been coal mining. It's always going to be coal mining. But Hollywood doesn't care about coal mining, so you don't know about the dangers of coal mining. So the police officer's normal career never involves hearing gunfire, even hearing it on the job, in the line of duty, never firing the gun, never being shot at. And so we are dealing with a microscopic level of police behavior here, and then we're dealing with a smaller piece of that, which is the bad shooting.
Right, and also the veil of silence, what do you call it, the thin blue line of where the officers, the co-officers try to cover up. And what's interesting is I thought the police officer who was recently convicted of murder, which was pretty high in Texas.
The dynamics that create the bad shootings are familiar and repetitive, and so that's why it's not surprising that the killing and the cover-up by the Boston police that I describe in this book is exactly what police departments around the country have always tried to do with this. Because of the new awareness, people are alert enough now to grab their cell phones and start recording. Well, that technology wasn't available until relatively recently in this subject. And so you had hundreds and hundreds of unarmed black men over the years being shot in the back by police officers, posing no threat to the police officer. But the police story would always be the same, and it would always, in the police report, always have these words, and it didn't matter whether it happened in New England or whether it happened in the Southwest. The officer would write, "He turned in a threatening manner as if to shoot." And it was dark, and it turns out he had nothing in his hand, and now he's dead, but I thought he was going to shoot me, so I killed him, and that story always worked. And we saw this incident in East Pittsburgh this summer of Antoine Rose, who was shot in the back running away from a police officer, a teenager running away from a car, and the story in the pre-cell phone era would have been, he turned in a threatening manner as if to shoot. That story couldn't work because someone had the presence of mind to take out their phone from their home. You can see this is shot from inside someone's home across the street, records the video of this kid running away from the police officer and being shot in the back as he runs away from the police officer. So the officer couldn't tell a story that could explain what was on that video in a non-criminal way. And so within 2 weeks of the shooting, that officer was charged with criminal homicide. And that's one of the examples of what I would call the incremental, and I hate to use this word in this arena really, but this incremental progress. I wouldn't try to tell Antoine Rose's family that there's progress. I wouldn't want to say that.
No.
But when you look at a subject and say, what happened to Antoine Rose used to happen with absolutely no concern on the part of the police. They would cover it up. They would absolutely get away with that. The idea that technology captured it, the camera phone captured it, changed that outcome in a way that turns the outcome toward justice. But as I say, I hate to use the word progress in a story where a teenager is dead. Police culture remains the biggest problem. The police culture is protective. It's not unique that way, but there are more things at stake in the police culture. I mean, the medical profession is protective. The people don't. Most, but this is a different level of duty. This is a police force in America that has pledged to serve and protect. They've taken an oath to serve and protect, not to protect themselves. That's not what the oath says. It is to protect the citizenry, and these are the most powerful government officials in America. President Trump fantasizes that he could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and nothing would happen, but in fact, a police officer can do that. And if the police officer does it in the dark and no one is watching and no one records it, what happened is whatever the police officer says happened. And that is a uniquely powerful government function. For a government worker to be able to be the prosecutor and the jury and the sentencing judge sentencing the death penalty on the street in an instant is the most powerful government action we have against citizens. And so the standard of how to respond in the aftermath of these cases is the most important thing. We're going to have them. There's going to be human error. There's going to be accidents. There's going to be malice. There's going to be pilot error, as they call it in the airline business. And what I want to see is a response to the aftermath that is as honest and serious as what happens when we have a plane crash. When we have a plane crash, we immediately send out the experts wherever it is, and they figure out why that commuter plane crashed in Buffalo. And most of the time, what they come back with is
So should they be like umpires? I mean, in New York, we have this age-long dispute about the Civilian Review Board. and how it operates with police conduct and the transparency and the reports back to the community. But you can never get over that fact that it's still the police department that is the one eventually in charge. You think we should suggest that there be a new profession of investigators
Yes,
that
there should.
travel from one place
Yes,
to
it
another?
should be a federal.
They have no allegiance.
We
to
have
each
the
group.
National Transportation Safety Board.
Yeah.
They go out and they investigate every
Yeah,
plane
it's
crash.
very
We
interesting.
should have the National Law Enforcement Safety Board,
All right.
and they go out and they investigate. And there's not too many of them.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
it's not like they're going to be overwhelmed with this. They've got 1,000 cases a year that they have to do. Right off the bat, you can eliminate any questions within 24 hours. You can eliminate questions in 500 of those cases.
Well, let's start with
That's
the
how
next
easy
session
it
of
is.
Congress.
Yeah, and because when this book was first written in the 1980s, the Civilian Review Board movement was the most important police reform movement in America. And we were trying to get civilian review boards of police departments in places like New York, in Boston, Los Angeles. They were trying this. And they got them in some places. But politics made sure that they defanged these civilian review boards as much as they could. And that the police commissioner generally would have the power to overrule whatever they found, or they would fill it with appointees who were likely to come out a certain way. And so every reform we have tried, everything that we thought would help us get to a better place on police use of deadly force, has not worked. The rule, just changing the police rules to be more restrictive, did not work. And it's because it's a human system. And so what I've come to the conclusion of after over 30 years of studying this is we aren't going to come up with the thing that stops it before it happens. We've done a lot to reduce how much shooting there is, and we've done a lot to make police more careful, but there are still going to be the cases. There are still going to be the bad shootings. And what happens when there is a bad shooting? And we saw in Ferguson, Missouri with Michael Brown that no one was quite sure what would happen. No one really knew. And so that was part of what the community protest was about. And eventually the district attorney says, well, okay, we'll have a grand jury. But nobody knew that you'd have a grand jury on the first day or the second day. And so what we need is we need the country to know exactly what's going to happen as soon as one of these incidences occurs anywhere in the country. And when the body is lying dead on the pavement, the community should be standing there knowing this is what's going to happen next.
It's a process.
When are the federal investigators coming in? They'll probably be here this afternoon.
I want to talk about the book also because it's really like a forensic study of a trial of how it goes about. Unfortunately, it was a civil trial. And your father, it's a book in a way, it's very tender about your father. And I was thinking about him when we were talking about the program. I guess he was sort of a McCain kind of person. Right? Listen to the eulogies.
When you grow up, in the house with someone, you don't realize how unusual they are.
Yeah.
But my father was a typical Boston Irish guy who had trouble getting through high school and had no real career prospects and found his way into the Boston Police Department, which was the best you could possibly pull off. Everybody's mother wanted their son to get one of those jobs you can't be fired from, like fire department or police department or post office. And most of the fathers in my neighborhood were in one of those places. And so my father was a Boston cop. And he kind of quickly got troubled by what he saw in courtrooms when he had to sit there on the witness stand. And he was enough of a wise guy to be sitting there on the witness stand and quietly thinking to himself, I could do that, when he's watching those lawyers out there. So he put himself through college and law school nights at Suffolk University in Boston while he was working full-time as a Boston cop. And he eventually became a lawyer, and he became a really great lawyer. And he had defended a lot of cops in a lot of corruption cases. There was one entire police department in Massachusetts that was under a federal investigation, and he defended them successfully through that. And then one day, this black widow, Patricia Bowden, came in to see him to say, my husband was killed by Boston police last month. This is what I can tell you about him. This is what I can tell you about what happened. And I know he was shot in the back of the head. And she knew that without ever having seen an autopsy report. She knew it because her husband, James Bowden's brother, went to the morgue to identify the body and was so shocked that James Bowden could have been shot by police because he had no criminal record, never been in trouble, that he wanted to see where the bullet wounds were. And he literally picked up his dead brother in the morgue and pulled up the body up and looked around and found himself where those bullet wounds were. And so when my father heard that, that's all he had to hear. He went on his cop instinct that this was a bad shooting. And so this became a multi-year war with his old police department that my father waged on behalf of this woman. And it's a real family story, and it's a very peculiar bubble that these two families were in beginning in 1975 in Boston. The Irish O'Donnell family, typifying the biggest segment of Boston, and the Black Bowden family coming together when Boston was coming apart in a racial madness because school busing had just started. And black children going into my neighborhood and going into other neighborhoods in Boston were being stoned. The eggs and rocks were being thrown at their buses. And it wasn't just the kids in the neighborhood, the white kids in the neighborhood who were attacking those buses coming into those white communities. Their parents and their grandparents were right there with them on the street, screaming racial epithets at these black kids in these buses. And in the midst of all that madness that the city of Boston was going through that year and for years to come, here are these two families, this white family and this black family, coming together in this crusade. And so it's a very personal story, and all of the heroic dimensions of my father on display there. And there are a few hints about the non-heroic dimensions of my father, that this was not a story of what life was like with him every day at home, which was much more difficult from time to time, because he had quite a temper, but all that emotion that he brought to this case, all that passion, all that stuff is what drove it. And I don't think any other lawyer could have handled it, because it took the former cop to dismantle what the cops were doing.
Right. You were a kid, basically.
Yeah, I was in college at the time when this story started, and I ended up then going into my father's office and following it. And writing. He suggested to me, you should write a book about this. This is my best case. And he had cases that were made into movies before and books and all that. And so he really knew drama, and he was right about it. And so the book was actually his idea.
Yeah, and your brother was part of it.
Yeah, my brother Michael and my other brothers were all involved.
I love it. It's O'Donnell.
They were in this law firm in Boston that my father called O'Donnell, because it was Lawrence O'Donnell and my older brother Michael O'Donnell and my other older brother Kevin O'Donnell as partners. My brother William O'Donnell was then a law school student making his way toward that profession. My younger sister Mary ended up going to law school. I'm the only one who didn't go to law school.
You are?
Yeah.
You don't regret it?
No, I absorbed enough of it.
But you did all this work that entailed kind of a legal background.
Yeah, and so, but as a result of that, I'm not, one of the things I hate the most when I watch shows like mine, and the interviewer is stepping into a legal arena of some kind. And they so often say, well, I'm not a lawyer, but, and I just feel, what you can hear in that is the intimidation that, oh, I'm talking to lawyers now, and they know so much more than I do.
It's the world, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's the
and
world.
It's simply not true.
Only people knew that common sense was really the basic key, we would be so much better off, right?
Yeah, and there's great lawyer stories in here, and there's great courtroom drama stuff in this book. And all the things that they don't teach in law school. There was this great moment in jury selection. This is just one example. And this is just one example about the unique experience of my father as the lawyer in this case. In jury selection, there was a woman in the jury pool who, when the facts about the jurors get revealed, it turns out she's married to a police officer. She's married to a police officer in a neighboring community to Boston, in Revere, the town of Revere. She's married to a police officer there. And I am sitting there and I just assume my father's going to challenge this juror, or the judge is going to knock this juror off without using up a challenge, because you can't have the wife of a police officer judging two police officers in what is essentially a murder case. And the other side, the police lawyers, looked very happy with her. And my father doesn't challenge her. And she remains on the jury. And then we immediately go to a recess, and my brother Michael, who's sitting right beside my father, is as shocked as I am. And I come in from the spectator seat immediately, and Michael and I surround my father, and we go, "What are you doing? You left her on the jury." And he says, "Okay, first of all, nobody hates Boston cops more than Revere cops. Nobody, okay? Secondly, nobody knows how bad cops can be better than their wives."
You've reported everything. It's from the macho TPF people, right, who are out for excitement, and they're traveling with a reporter, so they have to show up, show off what's happening. You know, it's a very engrossing thing, in addition to being so meaningful. So can we talk for a minute about politics?
Yeah, of course.
All right, so what are we going to do?
I don't know. I have no predictive capacity. I gave up predicting after, I remember saying this on TV, in the Republican primaries, when Donald Trump went from 6% to 12% in the polls, and Jeb Bush was still up around 20.
And everybody said, "Oh,
and I said, well, you don't think he's going to get any higher than that, do you?" And so I have given up all predicting, and I'm just living hour to hour. And so I have no idea what's going to happen. The reason we've all been talking about it the way we have is that there's only one familiar rhythm to this, and that is the rhythm of 1972, 73, 74, the investigation of Richard Nixon, which led to an impeachment process that then provoked his resignation. That's what this feels like, but
it's
we don't
also
know.
a time, aside from the president, it's a time, obviously, of change within parties. And what I don't like is the immediate divisiveness. Now we're talking attacking socialism. When somebody says they're a democratic socialist, I think FDR, and back to the thing. I mean, we're talking about Social Security, Medicare, all these kinds of things, but we're already seeing the attacks on the left, which bothers me.
I'm gonna recommend that you not be bothered by it.
Okay.
Because let's just think about this. Socialism has always been a bad word in America.
I know.
And so it's always been a curse. And so no politician would ever publicly claim it for himself or herself.
The way they don't say liberal anymore, they have to be progressive.
Right. And so, and the Democratic Party, where they got afraid of even the word liberal, right? Because Michael Dukakis was accused of being a liberal, he had to then deny that he was a liberal, and America knew he was denying the truth, and that didn't work out very well. And so, so now the word socialism disappeared from political discussion for about 40, 50 years. It suddenly reemerged in 2016 when a candidate for president arose who had been labeling himself harmlessly, to everyone's view, a socialist for many years, and no one cared because he was the socialist senator from Vermont. Who cares? And so Bernie Sanders becomes this giant rocket, going from 3% in the polls up to this amazing performance against an establishment Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton. And I started to think two things about this. This is so great that my colleagues on cable news, their first 3 or 4 interviews with Bernie Sanders were consumed with socialist. What does this mean? You're a socialist. What does that mean, right? And none of them understand the word. None of them understand that they are all socialists because they all favor socialist programs like Medicare and Social Security and this whole range of socialist programs that we have, imported from European socialism. And they don't understand what the word means. And so there was Bernie Sanders beginning America's 21st century education about what it means. And he came in second in the Democratic competition for the nomination, which is pretty great for someone who's got the word socialist attached to him. And then you have, these congressional candidates popping up who are willing to use the word socialist, and they win, and they will spend, this is their burden. They have taken on this burden by taking on that word. They are going to spend their initiation period with the national media defending against this word socialist and what it means. And they will do it with varying degrees of skill. And eventually, the American news media, it's going to take 10 years, is going to get used to the idea that socialist is one of the words that you don't have to be afraid of anymore. But America is still in the fear, well, I shouldn't say America, about 60% of America is still in the fear stage of the word socialist. And people below a certain age have no fear of the word whatsoever. Right. I remember as a freshman economics student in college when we got to the chapter on socialism and I read the elements of socialism and I went, oh, so I guess I'm a socialist.
Right.
You know.
We're going to keep watching you. We've come to the end of this program, and I'm so sorry. I hope you write another book so we can talk about that and that we can talk about the future of politics.
I'm going to do both of those
We're
things.
going to keep watching your program. Thank you so much.
Ronnie. Who is it? That's the question of the night. Who did it?